Latin America was the incubator of the American empire.
Today, a special broadcast, an hour with Juan Gonzalez talking about his extraordinary book, just updated, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America.
This is the unintended harvest of the empire. The empire expected just to take resources and wealth. It never expected so many of the people of these countries it was exploiting to come to the metropolis.
All that and more coming up. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we spend the hour with Juan Gonzalez. In addition to co-hosting Democracy Now! For the past 26 years since its founding, Juan is a professor at Rutgers University and was a co-founder of the Young Lords in New York. He's also the author of many books, perhaps most notably Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. It was originally published in 2000 and became a bestseller and is required reading in hundreds of colleges and high school courses. Well, Juan has just published a new updated edition, which is required reading for everyone. We recently sat down and talked about his book, and I asked him why he found the need to write Harvest of Empire.
I think the biggest thing that we have to understand is that this country has been grappling with what to do about immigration policy now for about 30 years and has not been able to come up with a refashioned immigration system in the United States. And every few years and every administration promises that they're going to do something about an orderly flow of migrants into the country. But the reality is that there's resistance and a huge battle over how migration will be governed in the 21st century, because we're really talking about who gets to be an American in the 21st century. So it really is an issue of who can legally come into the country and have an opportunity to be a citizen and a voter. And I think that what's happened is that we really have not come to grips with, as the title of my book says, the harvest of empire. That the reason there are so many Latinos and people from Latin America coming into the United States is that Latin America was the start of the American empire. It was where the first overseas colonies of the United States came into existence. It's where the United States constantly was intervening with its military forces, where most of the major multinational companies began to grow. Companies like the United Fruit Company and others. Latin America was the incubator of the American empire. And so we are in a position, and we have been now for decades and decades, since really the end of World War II, we're in the same position that the French are in regards to North Africans, that the British are in relationship to their former colonial empires of India and Pakistan and Jamaica, and that the Germans are in their tiny empire that they developed toward the end of the 19th century in the Middle East. That all of these former colonial powers are trying to figure out what to do about the fact that so many people from their former colonies have come to the metropolis. And that is the fundamental issue that all of these Western countries are facing, the actual change in the composition of their countries. And when it comes to Latin Americans, it's astounding. I started writing this book in the 90s, and I even have been astounded by the continued growth of the Latino population of the United States. The latest census says that there are 62 million Latinos in the United States, the 2020 census. That's about 18.7% of the population. But even the Census Bureau acknowledged that that's an undercount, that they undercounted about 3 million more Latinos that they should have counted. It was the largest undercount of any group in the census. And that doesn't count the 3.2 million people in Puerto Rico, which is not considered part of the United States, but is under the U.S. flag. So if you add the 3 million from Puerto Rico and the 3 million undercount, you're talking about 70 million people of Latin American descent under the U.S. flag. That's about 1 in every 5 people in the entire country. So this increased, and when you look at the young people, that's where the real stunner is. California is about 40% Latino, but the public schools of California are 54% Latino today. The public schools of Texas are 52% Latino today. The public schools of Arizona are 45% Latino today. When you go into even the southern states, in Georgia, the Latino population is 10%, but the population of the public schools is 16%. In North Carolina, it's 18%, the Latino public school population. This is the future of the country. And so I don't think that we really have yet grasped how the impact, the unintended harvest of the American empire is coming to roost right here in our own country. And that's why the political leaders are having so much trouble trying to figure out how to develop a comprehensive immigration and humane immigration policy.
So, Juan, you begin your book by saying in June 2018, media reports revealed U.S. Border Patrol agents had detained hundreds of Latino children inside chain-link cages at a warehouse in the southern Texas border city of McAllen. The disturbing images of terrified toddlers wailing for their parents provoked the worldwide condemnation. I just want to play that audio, just a few seconds of it, that ProPublica released. That crying rocked the world, and at the time exposed the Trump administration policy. Yeah, you know, zero, the policy of zero tolerance. Yet we are under the Biden administration. Talk about what happened then and what has changed.
Well, there has been some slight changes of the Biden administration, especially in the attempt by the Trump administration to shut down legal immigration or asylum. There's been some changes in there, but the problem is that there still is no legal framework for dealing with the migration situation today. And we're not talking just about the issue of undocumented versus documented workers. We're talking about visas for guest workers. We're talking about asylum numbers, which the United States should rightfully increase substantially the numbers that it permits of asylum or refugees into the country, so that we don't have a clear framework to deal with the current conditions of migration in the hemisphere and in the world. But I think the even worse part of it, and this is where in my updated edition, because again, my last edition came out in 2011, so this really deals with all of the changes, and there are many changes that have occurred in the Latino experience in America over the last 10 years. It updates those. Let me just give you one startling fact that I came across in doing my new research. Right? In 1998, 2/3 of all arrests by federal government agencies in the United States were of U.S. citizens. In 1998, 2/3 were of U.S. citizens. 20 years later, in 2018, 2/3 of all the arrests of federal agencies in our country were of non-citizens. The entire federal and law enforcement bureaucracy has been turned into a persecution operation for non-citizens. In 2018 alone, the federal government arrested more Mexicans than it did American citizens. They arrested more Mexicans than they did American citizens. That's an extraordinary change in the operation of the federal government. The budgets. The U.S. in fiscal year 2021 spent $26 billion in immigration enforcement, in the budgets of ICE and of Customs and Border enforcement. $26 billion. That's more money than is spent in all its other federal law enforcement agencies. The DEA, the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the Secret Service. All of those agencies spent less money than did Customs and Border Enforcement and ICE. So the entire federal government apparatus has been turned over the last 10, 15 years into an apparatus hunting down, deporting, locking up immigrants. And we're not just talking about undocumented, because there are all of the people who were legally in the United States, but then were some time or other convicted of what the government called aggravated felonies, and then were deported. So there is a repression and deportation machine that has developed at the federal level against, and they're mostly people from Latin America. Here's another startling fact that I came across in my research. Between 2010 and 2017, the United States deported 1.5 million people who were either legally in the United States or undocumented, and they were convicted of a crime or an aggravated felony. And by aggravated felony, we're talking about almost anything. A DUI under the Clinton penal code reforms was an aggravated felony. 1.5 million people deported. Of those people, 93% came from only 4 countries: Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. 93% of the 1.5 million people deported came from 4 countries. The rest of the world was the other 7%. Even though people from those 4 countries only represented about 1/3 of all the non-citizens in the U.S. That's racial profiling. How do you come up with 93% of all the people you deport because they committed a crime come from only 4 countries? The entire apparatus is geared to kicking out Latin Americans, and no one is doing anything about it.
And you have this Summit of the Americas right now, Juan. And Mexico, as you're talking about, AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, refuses to attend because of the U.S. imposing who can come to the Summit of the Americas and who can't. Also, El Salvador, Honduras, Bolivia, none of those countries, and Guatemala, the presidents come either.
Yes, well, I think that this Summit of the Americas is really the complete failure of the Biden administration to be able to show a united front in Latin America. It's really a reflection of what has changed geopolitically in Latin America. And in my new edition, I touch on that somewhat, which is that Latin America is no longer the U.S. backyard. It used to be. It used to be during the days of Teddy Roosevelt and gunboat diplomacy, and even into the 1930s and 40s, and even in the 60s with President Kennedy and the Alliance for Progress. But Latin America has changed dramatically, and one of the big changes, of course, has been the rise of popular movements outside of the established political structures that long reigned in these countries, and the movements of indigenous people and marginalized people in these societies, and the working class in this society. But the other big change has been the rise of China as a major force in Latin America. While the United States was off fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and trying to maintain oil supplies and dealing with Syria, and China was investing in infrastructure in Latin America, building huge multi-billion-dollar dams and tunnels and ports, and providing low-interest loans to many Latin American governments. And so these governments no longer feel they have to do what the United States says. And increasingly, the region is no longer a region dominated by one power. And as a result, now many of these governments feel that they can reject loans from the United States or demands of the World Bank because there's an alternative source of funding. Now, of course, China has its own desires in terms of its grabbing hold of future sources of raw materials, but the Chinese aid does not come with all of the military threats and all of the insistence that things be done China's way that the United States has practiced for so long in Latin America. So as a result, now there's room to maneuver among the leaders of the Latin American countries, and you're seeing it happen. You saw it happen at the Summit of the Americas last week.
That's right. Yeah, and you have this, The Hill reporting China, which by now has held 3 China-Latin America ministerial forums at the level of foreign ministers, has called out the United States for discriminating among Latin American countries, pointing out Washington is stuck in a Cold War mindset.
Yes, absolutely, and we're seeing it now. For instance, in Venezuela, we had the ridiculous situation that the Washington still recognizes Juan Guaido, the opposition leader in Venezuela, as the his legitimate president of Venezuela. When the reality is that for several years now, it's been clear that whatever criticisms there may be of Maduro as the president of Venezuela, and there are many, that the Venezuelan opposition is so fractured and so impotent that it has no capacity or ability to run Venezuelan society. And yet, and of course, the United States now, because of the war in Ukraine, is even trying to create new chances for negotiations with Maduro and Venezuela in order to secure more oil supplies for the U.S. Well, not for the U.S. so much, but certainly for Western Europe because of the war in Ukraine.
You've been listening to Juan Gonzalez, host of Democracy Now!, author of Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. And if you'd like to get a copy of this book, please call 212-209-2950. For a $100 contribution, you get a copy of this book. We're going to go back to the interview with Juan, but please call in 212-209-2950. For a contribution of $100, you get the WBAI membership, and you get Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. Juan first published this book in 2000 and then published the book about 10 years later. Now this is the second newly updated classic work of Juan Gonzalez right through the Biden administration. This is a book not to be missed by anyone. It's called Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. Now, if you pledge $10 or more, you can become a WBAI buddy. $15 or more, and you get Harvest of Empire. That's $15 or more a month. Or just one-shot deal, $100, and that would be fantastic for WBAI. You can do it 2 ways, by calling 212-209-2950 and saying you want to be a BAI buddy, and for $15 or more a month, or for a $100 one-shot deal, you get Juan Gonzalez's book, Harvest of Empire, History of Latinos in America, a sweeping history of the Latino experience in the United States. The New York Times Book Review says a serious, significant contribution to understanding who the Hispanics of the United States are and where they come from. The Miami Herald says a compelling, enlightening chronicle offers an insider's view of the rich and varied fabric of the largest minority in the United States, and it's written by Juan Gonzalez. Gonzalez, Rutgers journalism professor, longtime reporter for the New York Daily News. He was a columnist there for almost 30 years and has been with Democracy Now!, his other DN, not Daily News, but Democracy Now!, from the beginning, 26 years ago. Juan started co-hosting Democracy Now!, and I'm so honored to be working at his side all of these years. Get a copy of his book. Whether you're a high school student and this is required reading, or college or graduate school, or you're simply a student of the University of the Airwaves of WBAI and Democracy Now!, get a copy of this book. $100 contribution or $15 or more a month, and you're getting Harvest of Empire, History of Latinos in America. This is a book not to be missed. 212-209-2950, 212-209-2950. If you call up, you can say that you're a BAI buddy and Democracy Now! Is your favorite show, or that you like this show very much, Monday through Friday, 8 to 9. Every morning, your daily grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international, investigative news hour. And I am so honored when you call all of us at Democracy Now! Honor WBAI. We are honored by WBAI Broadcasting, Democracy Now! Please call. Please let us know you're there. Maybe you could afford more. Maybe you could do a $500 contribution. Get this book out to a lot of libraries, a high school, a college library, a public library, a prison library. It's Juan Gonzalez's great work, Harvest of Empire, History of Latinos in America. Please make your call. Yep, this is a book that covers Latinos, the largest minority group in the United States, and their impact on American culture and politics, greater than ever. At once comprehensive and intimate, Harvest of Empire traces the history of the Latinx population in the United States across 5 centuries, from the European colonization of the Americas to the 2020 election, with family portraits of real-life immigrant Latino pioneers, as well as accounts of the events and conditions that compelled them to leave their homelands. Juan highlights the complexity of a segment of the American population so often discussed but frequently misrepresented. A landmark history, required reading for anyone wishing to understand the history and legacy of this influential and diverse group, which you may or may not be a part of, but you intimately come to know through Juan's eyes, his research, his historiography, his book, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. The award-winning journalist Juan Gonzalez. Get a copy of his book for $100 or more, or for $15 or more a month at WBAI.org. You can just click on Buddy and make your pledge right there, or go to 212-209-2950 and say you want to be a BAI buddy. That's at $15 or more a month, and you'll get a copy of Harvest of Empire. You can pledge $10 a month or $5 a month. That's fantastic, too. Or pledge $100 or $1,000 if you've done well and want to do good. $2,000 or $5,000 to keep independent media alive. Please make that call. Make it now. I want to go back to one. I want to go back to this interview. This book has been so many years in the making, and the writing and the research, and Juan has done such an amazing job with this. Please call in 212-209-2950. Give us a call. Let us know you are in the house. San Antonio Express News says a profound book with an equally profound message about the origins of Latino migration, domination, and colonization, and historical lessons not found in many American textbooks. Dallas Morning News says, in what would seem an impossible task, journalist Juan Gonzalez tackles the entire history of Latinos in North and Central America in a single volume so illuminating. Kansas City Star says, required reading not simply for Latinos, but for everyone. In these times, says Gonzalez's ever enjoyable prose grabs the reader and fills in the gaps left by a traditional American history education. Please call in right now. Pete Hamill writes, here at last is the extraordinary saga of the Latinos in North America, brilliantly, compactly told. All the descendants of the old immigrants should read this book to remind themselves of where they came from and where all of us are going together. 212-209-2950, 212-209-2950, or go to WBAI.org. You can pledge $100, get Juan's book, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, or go to WBAI.org, click on Buddy, and you can pledge $15 or more a month and get a copy of Harvest of Empire. But you can also pledge at $5 a month or $10 a month, or just pledge $100 and you'll get Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez. Please call 212-209-2950, 212-209-2950. Your call makes the difference. You make WBAI happen. Please let us know you're in the house, that you're standing up for independent media. We cannot do this work without you. Publishers Weekly says this excellent history of Latinos in North and Central America is fair-handed, extremely well documented, filled with the sort of details that explain rather than inflame. Juan Gonzalez, the co-founder of Young Lords, the professor of journalism at Rutgers, the longtime columnist at the New York Daily News, and one of the founding hosts of Democracy Now! And this is his book, among many, but this is his book, his latest one published because it's newly republished right up to this moment. Harvest of Empire, History of Latinos in America. Please make your call, the sweeping history of the Latino experience in the United States. If you live in Wyandanch, why don't you call? If you live in Bayshore or Brightwaters or Islip or Babylon, that's where I come from. That's right, Bayshore High School, that is my alma mater. 212, that's like Harvey Milk, 212-209-2950. Make the call that makes it possible for WBAI to happen. Maybe you live in Great Neck or Little Neck and want to stick your neck out for WBAI, or maybe you live in Hempstead or Amityville, Wyandanch or Port Jeff or Port Washington or Stony Brook or Stony Point. Maybe you live in Holtzville or like to go to the Hamptons. Give us a call. Maybe you live in Riverhead, maybe you live in Quogue. Make that call now. Make it possible for WBAI to happen. Maybe you live in Queens. Maybe you live in Long Beach, where my grandmother lived till she was 108 years old. 108. A woman of 3 centuries died in 2005, was born in 1897. And, well, then it was Poland, then it became Ukraine. We urge you to go to the phone right now. 212-209-2950. For all the grandmas out there and grandfathers, for all the children, for all the parents, for all those who mother or father somebody in the world, we urge you to call. If you appreciate WBAI, make the call that makes the difference. 212-209-2950. Or WBAI.org, and become a BAI buddy, a sustaining member of WBAI at $15 or $20 or $25 a month or more. You get a copy of Juan Gonzalez's book, Harvest of Empire, History of Latinos in America. Please make your call if you'd like that, or just make the pledge. Just contribute to WBAI to keep it on the air. Because when we cover war, we're not brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. The networks cannot say that. Yeah, we don't break every 5 or 10 minutes for a Raytheon or Boeing commercial. Or when we cover healthcare, we're not brought to you by the insurance industry or big pharma. When we cover the climate catastrophe, we are not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal industry, or nuclear power industry. We're brought to you by listeners like you who are deeply committed to independent media. We're going to go back to Juan Gonzalez right now. We urge you to call 212-209-2950. If you'd like to get a copy of his book, pledge $100 or pledge 15 or more a month, become a BAI buddy. You could also pledge $5 a month or $10 a month, but what counts is your call. If WBAI is important in your life, 99.5 FM, you're keeping WBAI in the air for people who can't afford to pledge, but for whom WBAI is a companion. We urge you to call 212-209-2950 or simply pledge right there at WBAI.org. Let's go back to Juan Gonzalez on Harvest of Empire. And Juan, in your new introduction, you talk about the use of the term Latinx.
As we know, in on Democracy Now!, we use the term quite often. Latinx has increasingly grown as a term to define the people of Latin American population here in the United States. But the reality is that a 2019 poll shows that only 3% of all Latinos used the term that year, and only 23% had even heard of it. There was a similar battle that arose some years back, more than a decade ago, over whether it was more appropriate to use the term Latino or Hispanic. I took the position then that I thought that these discussions about the most appropriate term were more debates among the intellectual class than they were among the masses of the people. The masses of the people generally refer to themselves by whatever nationality their parents were, and of course in the case of indigenous people, by their own native heritage. The reality, though, is that both Latino and Hispanic I began to use interchangeably. And of course, given that Latinx addresses the gender binary, that I thought that it's definitely a welcome term to use, but I continue to use them all three of them interchangeably. And in fact, I say in that introduction, I just wanted to see if I can find it for a second to explain. I say, moreover, most migrants from Latin America still prefer to identify themselves by their particular country of origin, or in the cases of indigenous peoples, by their native heritage. Their U.S.-born and raised children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will increasingly adopt different views. Ethnic identity, after all, is a social construct, much like racial identity. It requires a dynamic and fluid approach, not a static and rigid one, with every generation free to reimagine and redefine its own place in society. Though the actual economic and social conditions of any community should always take precedence over labels and intellectual descriptions. And that's so I use all three terms, Latinx, Latino, and Hispanic interchangeably. None of them are precise and accurate. All of them are acceptable in my perspective. And the most important thing is not the term or the label. It is understanding the class and racial and social condition of the masses of the people, and how they can improve their lot in society.
Juan, you also have new information about culture and how Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people are portrayed in this country. And you refer to Lin-Manuel Miranda. Now, last night were the Tony Awards, and the Latinx actor, composer, writer, Lin-Manuel Miranda honored Stephen Sondheim. But I want to go to him at the Tonys in 2016, because June 12th, Sunday, marked the 6th anniversary of the 2016 Pulse nightclub mass shooting in Florida, where 49 people were killed. Pulse was an LGBTQ plus club, most of the shooting victims Latinx. Lin-Manuel Miranda delivered a sonnet about the Orlando attacks at those 2016 Tony Awards. His Broadway hit Hamilton had won 11 Tony Awards that year. This is Lin-Manuel.
When senseless acts of tragedy remind us that nothing here is promised, not one day. The show is proof that history remembers. We live through times when hate and fear seem stronger. We rise and fall and light from dying embers, remembrances that hope and love last longer. And love is 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 love, cannot be killed or swept aside. I sing Vanessa's symphony, Eliza tells her story. Now fill the world with music, love, and pride. Thank you so much for this.
was Lin-Manuel Miranda in 2016, also spoke last night at the Tony Awards. Juan, talk about how Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people are portrayed in the media, in culture, in movies, in shaping the perspective of this, the largest minority community in the United States.
Yes, well, I mean, there's no doubt that probably the largest impact that Latinos have had in the country is in the realm of culture, whether it is in the music that we listen to, in the books that we read. In the case of Lin-Manuel, in his almost single-handedly beginning to revolutionize the American theater. And I think that that this sudden infusion, you know, I often say that Lin-Manuel Miranda is probably the biggest jobs producer for African Americans and Latinos in theater in the history of the United States, because because his two seminal works, In the Heights and Hamilton, as they are produced in regional theaters around the country, end up employing huge numbers of actors in all these places, and often for long runs. So he's become a jobs creator, just because of the popularity of those two shows and the impact that it's had on the class composition of theater goers is phenomenal. Not to mention the fact that he's almost helped to revolutionize how you teach American history to public school children. So I think that, but Lin-Manuel is just one of many young performers and artists that are really transforming American culture, because to the degree that Latinos become more a part of the society and intermarriage occurs between Venezuelans and Cubans marrying in Miami, and their children have this new Latino identity, whether it's Salvadorans or Mexicans in Los Angeles, or Puerto Ricans and Dominicans in New York. The intermarriage and the amalgamation of these various Latino cultures, and then Latinos also marrying and intermarrying with African Americans and white Americans, you're creating a whole new amalgamated culture in America, and with a strong Latinx infusion that I think is enriching the culture and diversifying the culture in ways that we really haven't grasped yet. But I think Lin-Manuel is probably the prime example of someone who is leading the transformation of American culture.
Juan, I wanted to go back to a clip of the 2012 documentary based on your book, Harvest of Empire, that talks about the history of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. In this clip, the involvement of the U.S. in the Dominican Republic, where many of the immigrants here in New York City hail from. The clip prominently features the Dominican-born Pulitzer Prize-winning author Junot Diaz.
The American nation cannot, must not, and will not permit the establishment of another communist government in the Western Hemisphere.
I'm here because the United States invaded my country in 1965. An illegal invasion, completely trumped up excuse to invade the Dominican Republic and crush our democratic hopes. We've lived the consequences of that illegal invasion politically, economically, and in the bodies of the people who were wounded, the bodies of the people who were killed. We've been living it for over 40 years.
There have been two major U.S. occupations of the Dominican Republic. The first was in 1916. The U.S. Army trained a new Dominican National Guard. It handpicked a former railway security officer, Rafael Trujillo, to lead that guard. And Trujillo then uses the power of the military military to seize control of the government.
He was like the most horrific imagination of this terrifying dictator. He would disappear Dominican and American citizens and kill them with impunity.
He basically ruled the Dominican Republic for 30 years with absolute, total control. He routinely kidnapped and assaulted the wives, even of his supporters. And throughout his career, made it extremely easy for American companies to do business in the Dominican Republic, but was a savage dictator. Eventually, even the United States government could not stomach his methods of operation, so the CIA joined with disgruntled military officers to back his assassination.
For the first time in 30 years, the people of the Dominican Republic are breathing the sweet air of liberty, and the streets are jammed in celebration.
Dominican Republic, last in 1965. From the 2012 documentary based on Juan Gonzalez's book, Harvest of Empire, which was directed by Peter Getzels and Eduardo Lopez. But I want to also go to a second clip. This features the indigenous Guatemalan Nobel Peace Prize winning Rigoberto Menchu.
Guatemala fue tremendo.
Guatemala was unbelievable. 200,000 dead that we have accounted for.
Más de 50,000.
50,000 disappeared. 83% of the disappeared and executed were Mayas.
Fueron mayas. Yo salí de Guatemala después de
I left Guatemala
que quemaron vivo mi.
after they burned my father alive in the embassy of Spain.
Pedían asilo político.
They were asking for political asylum from the Spanish government.
Y con el propósito de salvar sus.
They were trying to save their lives
Entraron en la embajada.
by entering the embassy.
Y en ese momento las fuerzas de
But
seguridad.
at that moment, the Guatemalan security forces attacked the embassy.
Los quemaron vivos.
They burned everyone alive.
A todos. Realmente.
No one survived.
De los campesinos, de los estudiantes.
Not the students, no one who was there.
En Guatemala, si lo que hay
If what exists in Guatemala is persecution, murder, killing, if what you have is insecurity,
yo prefiero romper la frontera
then I prefer to cross the border
más seguridad.
and go to a place with more security.
That was the Nobel Peace Prize winning indigenous leader Rigoberta Menchu. Juan, we have about 3 minutes left, from Dominican Republic to Guatemala to El Salvador to Honduras. Take us out with this history that so few people in this country understand.
You know, I think it's especially instructive seeing this clip on the Dominican Republic, because that's an invasion, a U.S. invasion that most Americans don't know about or never taught about, but yet was critical in the shaping of that nation. It was actually the second U.S. invasion of the Dominican Republic. There was one in the early 20th century. But I think it's especially instructive since we're now in the period when everyone is concerned about the war in Ukraine. What was happening in the Dominican Republic was that leaders had come to power, were trying to overthrow a military dictatorship, and the United States perceived them to be allying with another bloc, as President Johnson said, the communist bloc. And that was seen as a threat, even though the Dominican Republic itself was no threat to the United States. And repeatedly, our troops have gone into Latin America to overthrow governments or to stop popular revolutions, only because we didn't like what was happening there, not because those countries were a threat. And yet here we are criticizing Russia for daring to invade Ukraine because its leadership wants to be closer to another bloc to the west. The same logic that our country has used over and over and over again throughout the history of Latin America. And I think it's instructive for us to understand that this great power imperialism was trademarked and established. The model was established in Latin America by the United States. And that's why, as I say in my book, this is the unintended harvest of the empire. The empire expected just to take resources and wealth. It never expected so many of the people of these countries it was exploiting to come to the metropolis. That's why we need to fashion an immigration system that takes into account that history, the wealth inequality that we have fostered, and the violence and the arms that we have supplied to those countries, and try to fashion a more humane immigration policy for the future in the United States.
You've been listening to Juan Gonzalez. I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! What an honor it is to interview the co-host of Democracy Now! We've been together for more than a quarter of a century, 26 years of Democracy Now! Since its founding, and Juan's work is so important. Juan Gonzalez's book, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, a sweeping history of the Latino experience in the United States. You cannot not get this book. And you can support WBAI at the same time by calling 212-209-2950, 212-209-2950, and make a pledge of $100. The book is yours. You can also become a BAI buddy. You know, if you go to WBAI.org, you can make your pledge right there, or you can click on Buddy. If you pledge $15 or more a month, you can get a copy of Juan's book, Harvest of Empire, $15, $20, $25, whatever you can do. Or, maybe you're not going to get the book. You just want to make that pledge. But do it now. 212-209-2950, 212-209-2950. Yes, being a BAI buddy means you're there to sustain WBAI through thick and thin, and that happens a lot. Please call 212-209-2950. We are all in this together. Democracy Now! Airs Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 every morning, live as we broadcast your daily grassroots, global, uninhibited, independent, international investigative news hour. Please make your call.